This thing going? Yes. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm going to be announcing a new little series. Well, technically it's not new because I've already been doing it for a while, but this is the first time I'm really committing to it. I have this complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft book here. Now, I've read through most of the stories once before, one time. I'm going to go through it and I'm going to read through the entire book, story by story. All right? Some stories might take a little bit more than one video to get through, but the idea is that I'm going to read through them and give my opinions on them. It's going to be technically like me reacting to the story or me giving my interpretation of the story. That being said, the first, and remember, this is all of the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, so this is none of his letters or any of that. So, first off, if you don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is, he is the writer of, he's the creator of the Cthulhu mythos. He wrote stories like The Call of Cthulhu, which is what my favorite game is based off of, and a lot of the things in my channel are inspired by his work. He was a very odd person, and he had a lot of some completely morally wrong beliefs, some weird beliefs. Here's a little tiny blurb about him. H.P. Howard Philips Lovecraft, who was born in 1890 and died in 1937, was a prolific American writer who specialized in tales in the gothic, horror, and science fiction genres. So he basically created the genre of cosmic horror. He wrote his first story at the age of 14, and as a young man, he was a contributor to the pulp magazine Weird Tales. After a brief marriage and a stint living in New York City, Lovecraft returned to Providence, Rhode Island, where he lived most of his life and wrote some of his best works. His success came afterward, after his death, and he has influenced some of today's greatest writers and filmmakers, including Stephen King, Alan Moore, F. Paul Wilson, Neil Gaiman, name I can't pronounce, Guillermo del Toro. I don't know. So anyway, that's a little bit of information about him. And yeah, I'm going to try to get through the entire book. So, this first story is The Beast in the Cave. Let us get on our investigative hats and begin our delve, our descent into madness. Now, let me see if I can make this a little bit cooler for you. One moment, my friends. Now, The Beast in the Cave is a short story. So we shall see how this goes. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Wonder if I can turn this black and white. That's what I'm hoping for. There we go. Alrighty then. Now we're in 1920s vision. Let's begin. I've wasted 3 minutes already. The Beast in the Cave. The horrible conclusion, which had been gradually obtruding itself upon my confused and reluctant mind, was now an awful certainty. I was lost, completely, hopelessly lost in the vast and labyrinthian recesses of the Mammoth Cave. Turn as I might, in no direction could my straining vision seize on any object capable of serving as a guidepost to set me on the outward path. That never more should I behold the blessed light of day, or scan the pleasant hills and dales of the beautiful world outside, my reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief. Hope had departed. Yet, indoctrinated as I was by a life of philosophical study, I derived no small measure of satisfaction from my unimpassioned demeanor. For although I had frequently read of the wild frenzies into which were thrown the victims of similar situations, I personally experienced none of these, but stood quiet as soon as I clearly realized the loss of my bearings. Now, before I continue, I will say it's interesting to me how his writing style. He said, "That never more should I behold the blessed light of day, or scan the pleasant hills and dales of the beautiful world outside, my reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief." So he's saying that he will never see the blessed light of day again. But he's saying it in a really weird, backwards, flippy-floppy way. So, very interesting. Let us continue. Nor did the thought that I had probably wandered beyond the utmost limits of an ordinary search cause me to abandon my composure even for a moment. If I must die, I reflected, then was this terrible yet majestic cavern as a welcome sepulture as those which any churchyard might afford, a conception which carried with it more of a tranquillity than of despair. Starving would prove my ultimate fate, of that I was sure. Some, I knew, had gone mad under circumstances such as these, but I felt this end would not be mine. My disaster was the result of no fault save my own, since, unbeknown to the guide, I had separated myself from the regular party of sightseers, and, wandering for over an hour in forbidden avenues of the cave, had found myself unable to retrace the devious windings which I had pursued since forsaking my companions. Already my torch had begun to expire. Soon I would be enveloped by the total and almost palpable darkness of the bowels of the earth. As I stood in the waning, unsteady light, I idly wondered over the exact circumstances. Let me turn this all the way down. Over the exact circumstances of my coming end. I remembered the accounts which I had heard of the colony of consumptives who, taking their residence in this gigantic grotto to find health from the apparently salubrious air of the underground world, with its steady, uniform temperature, pure air, and peaceful quiet, had found, instead, death in strange and ghastly form. I had seen the sad remains of their ill-made cottages as I passed by them with the party, and had wondered what unnatural influence a long sojourn in this immense and silent cavern would exert upon one as healthy and as vigorous as I. Now, I grimly told myself, my opportunity for settling this point had arrived, provided that want of food should not bring me too speedy a departure from this life. So, I'm going to stop right there and go over a few things that I've noticed. First off, if I don't know how to pronounce something, please forgive me, okay? I don't even know what salubrious means, but, yeah, I don't know. So, here's what I've gotten so far. He's saying that he's in a cave, he's trapped. He doesn't know exactly where he is. He is sitting in a cavern, he's got a candle or lantern, and it's slowly going out. And he remembers hearing about that there were like people living down here, and he saw their huts and he was wondering why they were down here and whether they all died or not. He thinks they're all dead. The guide, it says that there was a guide and there was a party. So there's probably a group of sightseers with a guide, and the guide was telling them like ghost stories or something and saying there used to be people living in these caves. And so now he's thinking to himself, he's going to die. That's what he believes. So he thinks that now is a good time to start searching for clues as to what killed these people that were in the cave. Because he thinks he's going to die anyway, so might as well occupy himself somehow. Let's continue. As the last fitful rays of my torch faded into obscurity, I resolved to leave no stone unturned, no possible means of escape neglected, so summoning all the powers possessed by my lungs, I set up a series of loud shoutings, in the vain hope of attracting the attention of the guide by my clamor. Yet, as I called, I believed in my heart that my cries were to no purpose, and that my voice, magnified and reflected by the numberless ramparts of the black maze about me, fell upon no ears save my own. All at once, however, my attention was fixed with a start, as I fancied that I heard the sound of soft, approaching footsteps on the rocky floor of the cavern. Was my deliverance about to be accomplished so soon? Had then all my horrible apprehensions been for naught? And was the guide, having marked my unwarranted absence from the party, following my course and seeking me out in the limestone labyrinth? Whilst these joyful queries arose in my brain, I was soon on the point of renewing my cries, in order that my discovery might come the sooner. When, in an instant, my delight was turned to horror. As I listened, for my ever-acute ear, now sharpened in even greater degree by the complete silence of the cave, bore to my benumbed understanding the unexpected and dreadful knowledge that these steps were not from any mortal man. In the unearthly stillness of this subterranean region, the tread of the booted guide would have sounded like a series of sharp and incisive blows. These impacts were soft and stealthy, as of the padded paws of some feline. Besides, at times, when I listened carefully, I seemed to trace the falls of 4 instead of 2 feet. I was now convinced that I had by my cries aroused and attracted some wild beast, perhaps a mountain lion, which had accidentally strayed within the cave. Perhaps, I considered, the Almighty had chosen me for a swifter and more merciful death than that of hunger. Yet, the instinct of self-preservation, never wholly dormant, was stirring in my breast, and though escape from the oncoming peril might but spare me for a sterner and more lingering end, I determined, nevertheless, to part with my life as high a price as I could command. Another thing I'm noticing is that this guy seems extremely arrogant. He's constantly saying how great he is, how great his intellect is, how smart he is, how calm he is, how others in the same circumstances, have failed and they freaked out and he's not. So now he's, he seems very egotistical. And I think, it seems to me like most art, a lot of art, mimics the art's creator. And according to the life story of H.P. Lovecraft, he was something of a guy who thought that he was better than a lot of the people around him. Which is interesting. And it's interesting how a lot of his protagonists are very intellectual or think that they know better. And then it's also interesting how a lot of times they're wrong. So, anyway, just my 2 cents on that. Let me continue. Strange as it may seem, my mind conceived of no intent on the part of the visitor save that of hostility. Accordingly, I became very quiet, in the hope that the unknown beast would, in the absence of a guiding sound, lose its direction, as I had, and thus pass me by. But this hope was not destined for realization. For the strange footfalls steadily advanced, the animal evidently having obtained my scent, which, in an atmosphere so absolutely free from all distracting influences as that of the cave, could doubtless be followed at a great distance. So he thinks that there's a mountain lion or animal in the cave and that it's following him. He at first thought it was the guide, and then his mind switched. His idea switched. Seeing, therefore, that I must be armed for defense against an uncanny and unseen attack in the dark, I groped about me for the largest of the fragments of rock which were strewn upon all parts of the floor of the cavern in the vicinity, and, grasping one in each hand for immediate use, awaited with resignation the inevitable result. Meanwhile, the hideous pattering of the paws drew near. Certainly the conduct of the creature was exceedingly strange. Most of the time, the tread seemed to be that of a quadruped. Walking with a singular lack of unison betwixt hind and forefeet. Yet, at brief and infrequent intervals, I fancied that but 2 feet were engaged in the process of locomotion. I wondered what species of animal was about to confront me. It must, I thought, be some unfortunate beast who had paid for its curiosity to investigate one of the entrances of the fearful grotto with a lifeline confinement in its interminable recesses. It doubtless obtained as food the eyeless fish, bats, and rats of the cave, as well as some of the ordinary fish that are wafted in at every freshet of the Green River, which communicates in some occult manner with the waters of the cave. I occupied my terrible vigil with grotesque conjectures of what alterations cave life might have wrought in the physical structure of this beast, remembering the awful appearances ascribed by local tradition to the consumptives who had died after long residence in the cavern. That's another reference back to those people that used to live in the caves. Then I remembered with a start that even if I should succeed in killing my antagonist, I would never behold its form, as my torch had long since been extinct, and I was entirely unprovided with matches. The tension on my brain now became frightful. My disordered fancy conjured up hideous and fearful shapes from the sinister darkness that surrounded me, and that actually seemed to press upon my body. Nearer, the dreadful footfalls approached. It seemed that I must give vent to a piercing scream. Yet, had I been sufficiently irresolute to attempt such a thing, my voice could scarce have responded. I was petrified, rooted to the spot, in fact. I doubted if my right arm would allow me to hurl its missile at the incoming thing when the crucial moment should arrive. Now the steady pat of the steps was close at hand. Got my hunk of rock at the ready. Now, very close. I could hear the labored breathing of the animal, and terror-struck as I was, I realized it must have come from a considerable distance and was correspondingly fatigued. Suddenly, the spell broke. My right hand, guided by my ever-trustworthy sense of hearing, threw with full force the sharp-angled bit of limestone which it contained toward that point in the darkness from which emanated the breathing and the pattering. And, wonderful to relate, it nearly reached its goal, for I heard the thing jump, landing at a distance away, where it seemed to pause. Having readjusted my aim, I discharged a second missile, this time most effectively, for with a flood of joy, I listened as the creature fell in what sounded like a complete and total collapse, and evidently remained prone and unmoving. Almost overpowered by the great relief which rushed over me, I reeled back against the wall. The breathing continued, in heavy, gasping inhalations and expirations, whence I realized that I had no more than wounded the creature. And now all desire to examine this thing ceased. At last, something allied to groundless, superstitious fear had entered my very brain. And I did not approach the body, nor did I continue to cast stones at it in order to complete the extinction of its life. Instead, I ran at full speed in what was, as nearly as I could estimate in my frenzied condition, the direction from which I had come. So this character just snapped. Suddenly I heard a sound, or rather, a regular succession of sounds. In another instant they had reformed themselves into a series of sharp metallic clicks. This time there was no doubt. It was the guide! Then I shouted, yelled, screamed, even shrieked with joy as I beheld in the vaulted arches above the faint and glimmering effulgence which I knew to be the reflected light of an approaching torch. I ran to meet the flare, and before I could completely understand what had occurred, was lying upon the ground at the feet of the guide, embracing his boots and gibbering, despite my boasted reserve, in a most meaningless and idiotic manner, pouring out my terrible story, and at the same time overwhelming my auditor with protestations of gratitude. At length, I awoke to something like my normal consciousness. The guide had noted my absence upon the arrival of the party at the entrance of the cave, and had, from his own intuitive sense of direction, proceeded to make a thorough canvass of the by-passages, just ahead of where he had last spoken to me, locating my whereabouts after a quest of about 4 hours. That was a long time I was trapped in here. By the time he had related this to me, I, emboldened by his torch and his company, began to reflect upon the strange beast which I had wounded but a short distance back in the darkness, and suggested that we ascertain, by the rushlight's aid, what manner of creature was my victim. Accordingly, I retraced my steps. Maybe you should retrace your steps. Accordingly, I retraced my steps, this time with a courage born of companionship, to the scene of my terrible experience. Soon we descried a white object upon the floor, an object whiter even than the gleaming limestone itself. Cautiously advancing, we both gave vent to a simultaneous ejaculation of wonderment, for of all the unnatural monsters either of us had in our lifetimes beheld, this was in surpassing degree the strangest. It appeared to be an anthropoid ape of great proportions, escaped perhaps from some itinerant menagerie. Its hair was snow white, a thing no doubt due to the bleaching action of a long existence within the inky confines of the cave, but it was also surprisingly thin, being indeed largely absent save on the head, where it was of such length and abundance that it fell over the shoulders in almost inconsiderable profusion. Alright, so that's the hair. The face was turned away from us, as the creature lay almost directly upon it. The inclination of the limbs was very singular, explaining, however, the alternation in their use which I had noted, whereby the beast had sometimes used all four, and on other occasions but two, for its progress. From the tips of the fingers, or toes, long, nail-like claws extended. The hands or feet were not prehensile. The hands and the feet were not prehensile. A fact that means having a thumb. A fact that I ascribe to the long residence in the cave. Maybe not having a thumb. It means like being able to grab things from like two different ways, I think. A fact that I ascribe to the long residence in the cave, which, as I had before mentioned, seemed evident from the all-pervading and almost unearthly whiteness so characteristic of the whole anatomy. But although we thought it was some sort of monkey or ape, no tail seemed to be present. The respiration had now grown very feeble, and the guide had drawn his pistol with the evident intent of dispatching the creature, when a sudden sound emitted by the latter caused the weapon to fall unused. The sound was of a difficult nature to describe. It was not like the normal note of any known species of simian, and I wondered if this unnatural quality was not the result of a long and continued and complete silence, broken by the sensations produced by the advent of the light, a thing which the beast could not have seen since its first entrance to the cave. The sound, which I might feebly attempt to classify as a kind of deep-toned chattering, was faintly continued. Something like that, perhaps? Sounds almost like my cat. I don't know, though. Deep tone. Maybe like that? I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know if I remember this story. All at once, a fleeting spasm of energy seemed to pass through the frame of the beast. The paws went through a convulsive motion, and the limbs contracted. With a jerk, the white body rolled over, so its face was turned in our direction, and for a moment I was so struck with horror at the eyes thus revealed that I noted nothing else. They were black, those eyes. Deep, jetty black, in hideous contrast to the snow-white hair and flesh. Like those of other cave denizens, they were deeply sunken in their orbits, and were entirely destitute of iris. As I looked more closely, I saw that they were set in a face less prognathous than that of the average ape, and infinitely more hairy, and the nose was quite distinct. And as we gazed upon the uncanny sight presented to our vision, the thick lips opened and several sounds issued from them, after which the thing relaxed in death. The guide clutched my coat sleeve and trembled so violently that the light shook fitfully, casting weird moving shadows on the walls about us. I made no motion, but stood rigidly still, my horrified eyes fixed upon the floor ahead. Then fear left, and wonder, awe, compassion, reverence, and sadness succeeded in its place, for the sounds uttered by the stricken creature that lay stretched out on the limestone had told us the awesome truth. The creature I had killed, the strange beast of the unfathomed cave, was, or had at once time been, a man just like you and just like me. A man! Oh my. Okay then. That was interesting. Wow. That was very interesting. Let me think about this. So, let me try to turn that. There we go. So let's go over this. First off, let's say, what was the story about? So a guy got lost in a cave, and he found this creature that he thought was a mountain lion or something. He heard legends about people that had once lived in the caves and they had died. And he, what else did he do? He ran away from the creature and found the guide who had been looking for him for a long time. Then he and the guide went back to the creature. So he had thrown a huge chunk of rock at the creature earlier, which had knocked it on the floor and it was dying. And they went back and they looked at it and it was all weird and it was super pale. And then the thing turned over and made noises. And I'm assuming maybe it was like, help me, or something like that. I don't know. Deep tone shattering, but then it said that the last sounds revealed the awesome truth, which was that the creature is likely one of the people in the story. Now, how this ties into the entire Lovecraftian mythos is the concept of a ghoul, which H.P. Lovecraft came up with, not a normal ghoul, which a lot of times is more put with a ghost. Lovecraft's ghouls are very, very, very specific. And basically, they're people that have degenerated from the status of human because they're cannibalistic, very specific. And this cannibalistic thing that they do kind of turns them into, what does it call it? Slightly doggish, slightly apish, but still human, depraved human figure. And they live in caves and stuff, and they eat people. And I know that they're also supposed to be, what is it? Yeah, they're supposed to be they were once people. And the cannibalism allows them to live for a really long time. So there were urban legends and stuff of people that once lived in the caves, but then they had died or something. So this guy went into the caves and found one of the old residents. The book described them, or the story described them as consumptives, people who consume. And that likely either meant some form of drug or human flesh consumption. So, yeah, I thought it was a good story. Very short, but, I mean, it took 30 minutes to get through. But that's like an 8-page story, I think, something like that. 7 pages? 6 pages, okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a good story. I enjoyed it. That's number 1. We have like 2,000 pages of this book to get through. Thank you for starting on this journey with me. If you please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel to be notified when I hit the little bell notification so that you're notified when I post new videos. I'm going to be doing more readings. Let me know if you like the way I'm doing this. Do you like me stopping and explaining the way I think this is going? Would you rather me just go through it? Do you like me doing the voices? Do you like the emotion or whatever that I put in my voice? Because I've gotten some negative response to this and some positive response to these readings. So please let me know. But I want to go through the entire book because I feel like it's a fun thing to do, and it will help me to understand, and hopefully you to understand, the mythos a little bit better, and just exactly who H.P. Lovecraft was. I will also say that as I'm going through these stories, I'm not going to... I know that there are a few stories that have some racist themes to them, and I might go over them, but I will definitely need to censor parts of them because I'm not saying some of the things that this guy wrote, which is one of the... Why I keep saying he's a pretty weird person is because if you didn't know, H.P. Lovecraft was, at least in his younger years, a racist. And he also didn't like religious people either, which translates into what he creates, because he was basically afraid of anything that was different than himself. And because of that, he was able to create a bunch of crazy beings that scared him. His fiction was specifically to scare like an atheist and stuff, which might be why I find it so interesting and not scary. I don't know. I don't really know. But anyway, thank you very much for watching this. If you liked it, again, please let me know, and like and subscribe and hit the bell notification. Thank you for watching. This is Dethstrok9 out.